on Tuesday evening, my mum reminded me of my granddad's wisdom. And to put it very simply, Granddad had a philosophy which was, you won't go far wrong if you live by the 10 Commandments. And I woke up this morning thinking about those commandments, and in particular thinking about them in reverse, the consequences of the breaking of those commandments. And I was thinking about that in the light of, God's counsel to us to pray for our leaders. And we have a situation in this nation, a spiritual situation, which I suspect is going to go one way, but it can go one of a number of ways. So what's this got to do with the 10 Commandments? Well, we have a king who historically and currently has the philosophy of being defender of the faiths. And in a few months' time, somebody in the Church of England is going to have to anoint this man. So what is the first commandment? And what might be the consequences of breaking it and others? Well, very simply put, God said to Moses, "You shall have no other gods but me." So I struggle to reconcile, "You shall have no other gods but me, and I will be the defender of the faiths." You might be able to reconcile that, but I can't. I can't reconcile it from my understanding of Scripture. That's the first commandment. God introduces himself to Moses as, "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt and out of the house of bondage." And then he gives Moses the commandments. The next being, "You shall have no other gods but me," or before me. So, for a people who break commandments, where do we find ourselves ultimately? If we're disobedient to God's commandments, is it reasonable to suggest that we might find ourselves in a house of bondage? So we must pray for our leaders, because historically this nation is a monarchy. And we can still be a monarchy, but King Charles doesn't have to take up a position which, to my reckoning, philosophically for him is counter to the task that he would be asked to fulfill if he's... I think the role with regards to his relationship with the Church of England is Supreme Governor or something like that. I mean, you can look that up for yourself, but to simplify things, he would be given some form of headship, whether he's over the archbishops, alongside them or under them. I suspect he would be over them. So in a chain of command, it's God, King Charles, archbishops, and so it goes on. So the Church of England's in a bit of a pickle, because there'll be some people in that organisation who will be praying, that maybe the king steps aside and says, "Well, I'll be king, but I can't, philosophically and in an honourable manner take up this position, because it runs counter to his spirituality." Taking the view that the Christian God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of David, and the God of Jesus, and so it goes on. then you can see that even with a basic knowledge of Scripture, you can't take the role that he might be asked to fulfill as of May this year. So will he do the honourable thing and say, I can't do this, it doesn't sit well with me? Or will tradition prevail? And just like the Christmas Day speech, a beautifully crafted lesson, and whatever they do when they crown somebody, they're going to have to twist those words to make it sound acceptable to everybody. And one shouldn't have to twist words. Let truth be truth, and let a lie be lie. And so to find yourself at odds with the first commandment, you can't be defender of the faiths and have no other gods before me. And so on that basis alone, I think my prayers are that King Charles would do the honourable thing and say, I can't take up this position, and that the leadership in the Church of England would be bold enough to suggest that to him. Why am I saying this? Because whilst it's nice to have the pomp and the circumstance, the ceremony and the traditions and the celebration and all the rest of it, this is also a serious spiritual matter. And the consequences that I believe will happen if the Church of England takes this, if the Church of England follows the traditional route, if it does what's expected of it, then the consequences of that are not good, because the gods of other faiths have come with different instructions, different moralities. And that puts them at odds with the one who describes himself as the God of gods. It places us as people, as spiritual beings, in a bit of a pickle as well. I believe that if things go along as I suspect they might, then it will open a door, and that door will allow into the nations, a greater darkness than there already is. His Majesty's government will be given to rubber stamp legislation which will put us into the house of bondage. When you look at the fruit of Her Majesty's government since the 1950s, when you compare this nation's legislation, so Her Majesty's, now His Majesty's government, has rubber-stamped many things which fly in the face of God's commandments, of God's righteousness and justice, of His best plan and purpose for humanity. And whether you love the monarchs, whether you're a royalist or not, love them or hate them, they're there for a reason. And one of those reasons, in a nation which now describes itself as post-Christian, is to be a standard for righteousness and justice, and not to produce their own standards of righteousness and justice, A monarch has subjects, and Jesus is a king, and we are his subjects. And so that makes our earthly monarch a subject of God's. And the best way to be a good subject is to be an obedient one. And my hope is, of course, that something wonderful happens, and that this door isn't opened, and that we as a people can rediscover righteousness and justice as given to us by a holy God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Moses, David, Jesus, all of these characters, and that we as a nation can remove the word post from the way in which some commentators now describe us. Because there's no such thing as post. You're either for God or you're against him. So to say we're post is simply a cowardly way of saying we're anti-Christ as a people. And when you look at the fruit of the legislation that's gone before us since 1952, one could say that some of the legislation, some of the fundamentals, when you compare it to the Ten Commandments, would bear out to the truth that we are becoming more and more anti-Christ. And as a people, that is not something to rejoice in. That is something that we must recognize, and that is something that we must resist the advancement any further of, and that is something which we must resist and advance against. And we must take our legislation, we must take our morality, and we must realign ourselves with God's will, with God's best, because if we do, then we will look like a blessed people, not a people who by their own choosing are slipping back into a house of bondage.